Thank you all very much for coming. This is a late day in the COP. We have negotiation text has just landed this morning. Those of you following the negotiations may be half distracted, so we're particularly grateful to you for coming. This is our event on advancing a just transition and securing new opportunities for least developed countries. I'm Professor Michael Jacobs. I'm visiting Senior Fellow at ODI Global, which is a global affairs think tank based in London but operating worldwide. And it's my great privilege to be chairing today's event. This is the second COP at which there's been a particular focus on trade, and it's expanded now to be defined as the trade and investment agenda. And we have already seen in this COP some progress being made in some areas. We've had a Baku initiative for climate finance, investment and trade, which is quite an interesting new development, something new after the various announcements that were made last year at COP 28. And of course, the new collective quantified goal, the NCQG, is our big negotiating issue. We know that least developed countries are now spending twice as much servicing their debts as they receive in climate finance. Many of the least developed countries are in or at risk of debt distress given the rise in interest rates over the last few years and the impacts of climate change and nature loss. And there's also been quite a lot of uncertainty over the last few years about the future provision of aid for trade channeled to LDCs through multilateral trust funds like the EIS. The WTO's EIS, Enhanced Integrated Framework, provides vital support to boost LDC's trade performance. And yet LDC's share of global trade and investment remains very low, only around 1%. Moreover, export concentration remains high. Around 20% of LDC exports are high carbon fuels. So our question really today is how we change these dynamics and tap into the major new economic opportunities within the global green transition, something that most countries are now committed to, but many countries are still in the early stages of implementing. A number of LDCs have the potential to leverage their natural endowments, not only those endowed with critical minerals, which are particularly important in the green transition, but also various forms of renewable energy, the expansion of clean energy grids with all the related positive productive spillovers, as well as their routes to green industrialization to advance their trade and development aspirations. There is a global green transition underway, but we know that there are trade barriers and trade issues being erected in this space, not least the carbon border adjustment mechanism of the EU. And we have an EU minister to discuss this with us today. We believe that to unlock these opportunities of the global green transition, we need to find new ways of working, new forms of finance, new forms of trade arrangements, and that's what we want to discuss in our meeting today. I was going to say we're privileged to have two environment ministers with us. This is not yet quite true, but hopefully we will have two environment ministers with us, taking time away from their role in the negotiations. Her Excellency Rohanjong Manjang of the Gambia and Her Excellency Romina Pourmokhtari of Sweden. We are still hoping both will arrive in time for their speaking slots. Unfortunately, the third minister on the panel that we were hoping to have, His Excellency Mike Mposha of the Zambia, is not well, but I'm very grateful to Dr. Dauti Chibamba, Permanent Secretary in the Zambian Ministry of Green Economy and Environment, for taking his place. Thank you very much. And it says here last but not least, but actually first but not least, it's great to have Sanish Kulkarni, who's Senior Manager of the Global Partnerships and Net Zero at Invest India, which currently holds the presidency of the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, WIPA. And I'm delighted to say this meeting has been convened in collaboration with the EIF, with the Enhanced Integrated Framework, and with the IIED, the International Institute for Environment and Development, with support from the Gates Foundation. So we're going to reverse the order because our two ministers are not here. So I'm going to ask Sanish Kulkarni of WIPA to open with your reflections on the new agenda of development and trade. Sanish.
Good morning, everyone. I am Sanish, and I would be speaking on behalf of WIPA. So WIPA is the World Association for Investment Promotion Agencies, where we are a 130 plus strong member association. We have representation from countries across the spectrum, and LDCs also are a key part of WIPA. So speaking about WIPA's members, 66% of our members have indicated that energy transition is one of the key factors or key focus areas they would like to look at. And 43% of our IPAs have also have also told us that they'll be looking at SDG oriented project development when they are going for infrastructure development projects or any kind of projects. So WIPA members are not looking at climate as something different, but we look at an holistic approach where we are trying to integrate whatever we are doing into a sustainable development framework. Now talking about LDCs again, LDCs account for only 4% of the global emissions historically, and I think it would be much lesser a decade back. But LDCs are the ones who are bearing the brunt of what the developed world has gone through during the industrial age. So that being said, what WIPA is trying to do is bring LDCs at par with the global audience and global countries, while also ensuring that the development in LDCs is at par with the world, but sustainable in nature. So we don't repeat the mistakes that are happening or that have happened earlier. With this in mind, as you rightly said, that enhanced integrated framework is one of the key program that is going on, and WIPA is an integral part of enhanced integrated framework. We have done more than 8 sessions with more than 800 participants coming in and 100 plus hours spent on these sessions. One of the key capacity building workshops that we did was for Francophone countries, where WIPA focused on upskilling these countries. Technical assistance is something that WIPA focuses on in LDCs. So when I mean technical assistance, what do I mean is that we are trying to build the capacities of LDCs and their investment promotion agencies to actually target the investors, how investors need to see the project files, how they need to look at the investment aftercare, investor aftercare, how to maintain the investor relation. So right from starting the scratch, that is what WIPA offers to LDC countries. And while going about this thing, we are also looking at organizing investment conferences across the world. So World Investment Conference, which is organized by WIPA, is happening exactly next week in Riyadh. And in that conference also, we are looking for providing special care to LDC countries for their participation, so they are able to target great investment. Now this is something what we are doing business as usual, but we are also doing investment conferences across, I would say, global south. So Nepal was one of the countries where we did Nepal Investment Summit, and that received a great response. And in our next phase, what we are actually looking at is doing investment conferences specially curated for LDCs. Again, on technical assistance, what I would like to highlight is we are doing technical assistance projects across Vanuatu, Malawi, Togo, and Bangladesh. Vanuatu investment strategy is soon to come out. WIPA is also one of the key members of Climate FDI coalition that is coming up. And WIPA will strive hard to get a lot of LDCs onboarded in the coalition. And there also, WIPA is going to be the secretariat. So WIPA will have a say in whatever is going to happen. So that is where we stand at this point of time. Apart from this, we are also trying to build capacities in startup ecosystem across LDCs. The Solar X Challenge, what we did with International Solar Alliance and Invest India, targeted Africa in the previous year, APAC region in this year, and it will be Latin America in the next year. So this is what we are doing as WIPA to bring LDCs at par with the global norm. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question about this? Can you hear me? So we're at a COP. We all believe, or at least I presume most of us believe, in something called a global green transition. Many of us are talking about green industrialization and various other things. If I asked you to be honest, how many of the LDC investment promotion agencies that you work with would say that they are trying to be part of a global green transition or even a national green transition? How, honestly, given LDC's desire to grow in many ways, how important is that?
I would slightly take a different angle to your question. If you look at the LDCs, LDCs are blessed with natural resources. Many of these LDCs have mountainous ecosystem or are in the coastal belt. So by default, their definition of development is going to be different than what the global north has undergone. So by default, I would say their intent for development is green. We are closely working with more than 35 LDCs through their IPAs or without their IPAs on building a sustainable development plan. So now what stand India or WIPA would take on LDCs is their development is by default sustainable. The intent is always there, and LDCs have strong grounding of indigenous communities, which are by default green. In the technical terms, that is green. So that is my take on this.
I'd like then to ask you, Dr. Jamamba, Zambia is blessed with many of the resources that are needed in the global green transition. You are experiencing now terrible climate change impacts, a drought which has been going on for nearly a year, which has led to electricity blackouts as water has dried up, and yet your ambition is to be part of the green transition. What do you need from the global trade and investment regime, the community, to enable you to realize that vision?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question.
Is that...
Thank you very much.
Can you hear? Is the mic on?
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. Indeed, Zambia is endowed with the necessary critical minerals to allow us to embark on this journey of green transition. We have the copper, we have the cobalt, we have the lithium. So we are set. In fact, we are already working with our neighbor, Democratic Republic of Congo. We are in the process of establishing a special economic zone where we want to start with manufacturing lithium batteries. So we have the base and we are ready to go. And partly this is the reason why our president has got a target of increasing copper production to 3 million metric tons per annum through 2030. So while we have the base set, we are a landlocked country. So we heavily depend on imports. So all the technologies that we need, whether it's towards solarization, whether it's in geothermal, whether it's in wind power, those products have got to be imported. All the technologies that we need initially, we have to import them. And this is where trade, the World Trade Organization comes in. What tariff and non-tariff barriers exist around these clean or renewable energy technologies that we need to get from outside? How can we help as a country to remove those tariff or non-tariff barriers? For example, we have this thing we call carbon border adjustment mechanism. We are hoping and praying that such kind of non-tariff barriers are not going to disadvantage us, because our goal is to add value addition to these minerals. So we could get to a point where we need to export some of these products. So how does, for example, this carbon border adjustment mechanism affect the products that we're going to produce in Zambia that we want to export to the EU market, for example? So As Zambia, we are ready, but we are appealing to the World Trade Organization and other partners that their tariffs or their regulations should not be a stumbling block on our journey to the just transition. But also on the just transition, I like the term just, because just means it must be fair to all the parties. And here, for example, it should not lead us to a point of getting to stranded assets. Yes, we are endowed with the natural resources. So if the transition has to be just, it should not get us to a point where we have stranded assets. And the carbon border adjustment mechanism is one potential barrier, non-tariff barrier, which could end up in non-tariff barriers. Yes, in your opening remarks, you mentioned about the load shedding or the power deficit that we're going through. Indeed, it's true. We have experienced one of the worst droughts in 40 years. And remember, about 85% of our power generation comes from green energy, which is hydroelectric power. Yes, hydroelectric power is green energy. But we have learned it the hard way that when there is no water, there's simply not going to be power. And there's never been a time that we need to move into renewables than now. We urgently need to diversify our energy portfolio from heavy reliance on hydro into the renewable space. And this is where any trade barrier that is going to be a stumbling block in our way becomes a very big problem, because we need to transition at a very rapid speed, I submit.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you a question about your critical minerals, which is, you were saying that you want to go into the manufacture of products, of batteries, for example. At the moment, who refines your minerals? Do you refine them in Zambia, or are you sending them to China or elsewhere even to be refined? So before even you get to manufacturing of products, where are they refined?
So at the moment, we are not refining. Of course, we send the bulk of it outside. And this is what the president wants to stop now. We have to start from somewhere. Even digging them out of the ground, the emphasis now is joint ventures. So we'll have to have an investor working with the local people to do the mining. And secondly, working with investors, we must start refining. No matter how small scale that we're going to start with, but we want to start refining so that we start adding value to the minerals for two important things. One, we get a better price when we send out a refined product. And also, we create thousands of green jobs in our local economy. Yes, we are not big on refining at the moment, but we want to get there, and we'll start from somewhere. Thank you.
As you can see, we've now been joined by Her Excellency Romina Pourmokhtari, Minister of the Environment in Sweden. Thank you very much for coming. This is just-in-time production, in which the speaker arrives just in time. And you arrived just in time to hear, I hope you did hear, our colleague from Zambia talking about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, I'm not going to ask you that first, but I'm going to ask it you second. So I hope you're prepared for that. And in fact, I'm really interested. I don't think we can actually conduct a negotiation between the EU and Zambia here, but I'm quite interested to know whether there is an agreement that is potentially achievable between the demand of the European Union for critical minerals that are not all made in one part of the world, and Zambia, which can supply them. That's where I'm going with the conversation. But let me just first ask you the easier question, if I may, Minister. Tell us just a little bit about how Sweden's development assistance and programs of various kinds are towards the least developed countries. What are you doing, and how much of that is green?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me join the panel. Sorry for the delay. I was sitting in a meeting on the negotiations, which is always prioritized. But I sneaked off to come here because it's very important for me to put pressure on the matters of just transition and specifically on opportunities for LDCs. These are my preferred specific, like optimized discussion points I'd like to have. So I was very keen to be here to discuss these topics. As you probably know, Sweden is one of the world's top financiers of climate financing, top providers, and we are not economically at the level to give the level that we're giving. We're not staying at the levels that would be appropriate, so to say, for our economies. We're definitely a lot more ambitious in that, and this is for one purpose, and there's many, of course, around it, but it basically comes down to one focal point, which is the fact that climate crisis, it's not a national topic, it's not a national challenge, it's a global challenge. So for Sweden to sit alone in our country or to only stay within the EU focusing on developing climate policy, it will never be enough. It will never be enough. So it's detrimental that we advance the cooperations and the development for climate transition around the globe. And specifically looking at LDCs, Sweden has a very, well, we have a ground for cooperation, one can say, that focuses on better living conditions and for people living in poverty, and to stop oppression and work against oppression. And these are topics that are very close to heart for our country. So these are the also, you could say, values that affect our tradition of ambitious development cooperation, which is very interlinked to climate matters. And specifically, the Swedish government recognizes that we know that we need further resources. Our country knows it because we are one of the biggest providers, and looking at other countries' economies, it is also provoking for us, right? That other countries are not delivering at the same amount that we are doing, because we know that it's a priority, and politics is always about priorities, and this needs to be prioritized by more countries. So we are very much in favor of an ambitious financial goal and pushing forward to get a good new NCQG, and we need to look at broadening the financing base. We have a lot of countries with strong economies with a high level of emissions that are not contributing, and this is an integral part of discussing a new goal for financing. But specifically for us, you mentioned that I should not go into CBAM, so I will try my very hardest to not
no, I definitely want you to go to CBAM. I was just giving you the easier
right?
question. Please do.
No, but I wanted to at least mention the thing about mining that you were discussing earlier, because Sweden has a long tradition of mining. And when I say that Sweden has a big mining industry, a lot of people that are not familiar with our country think that we have companies that have mines in other parts of the world, but that's not the case. We have mining in our country, in Sweden. We actually have one of the biggest finds for critical raw materials in Europe. So we do have a lot of mining in our own country, and we have a lot of experiences that we've learned from during the years. It's, for example, experiences on how to better the working conditions for people that are working in the mines. As you know, Sweden has a long tradition of developing labor rights. And we have tackled a lot of difficulties when it comes to indigenous people's rights in the areas where we have had big findings of critical raw materials. So this has also been one of the obstacles that we've gotten some progress on, but I wouldn't say that we have solved it. We still face difficulties in this.
People may not realize that Sweden has indigenous people who live in the north of Sweden, the Sami people.
The Sami people, yeah. And lastly, also the environmental aspects of mining, because I'm not only Minister of Climate, I'm also Minister of Environment, and the environmental aspects of mining is very much of importance for our country. So we have a very large and somewhat frustrating legislation for the mining companies, but they do have to follow it. And the results of this is that we don't only have mines that are producing critical raw materials, we have the world's most environmental friendly mining. And this is also a perspective to bring in. How can we make sure that the mining is not being done entirely on exploitation of our nature, of our planet? How can we make sure that it is done in the most environmentally friendly way that it can be? Because it is going to affect our environment, and we should not ignore those types of conflicts as well. So Zambia specifically is a country that Sweden cooperates with a lot, and we're looking forward to increasing this cooperation on ensuring how the development for mining in Zambia can be developed. We're very keen and pleased to see this development in Zambia, because we need to have more of the critical raw materials. It's evident, and I've always been a strong advocate of not being a hypocrite when it comes to this subject, because there are a lot of green politicians that don't think we should have mines in Sweden, and I'm telling them that you're not erasing the problem, you're moving the problem. You're moving the mining to another place in the world, and this is not a good way to handle the problem. So we should have our own mines, we should make sure that they live up to the standards that we have for environment, for labor rights, and make sure that we're a part of the solution and not exporting topics that we find difficult because of conflicts with indigenous people, because of environmental aspects, or because of labor rights.
Can I ask you then about the CBAM? So the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, I'm sure people know, is a mechanism designed to ensure that companies in the European Union that are facing a high carbon price, and there is an emissions trading scheme which generates a carbon price, are not undercut by imports of the same products from countries that don't have carbon price or climate regulations and therefore are going to be cheaper. That's the basis of it, because if you do get undercut, as you've just said there, the emissions are just exported to those countries. You don't reduce global emissions. So that's the rationale. But as you know, Minister, there are many countries who are worried about this. And we had an expression of an anxiety, a general anxiety about what impact this measure could have on other economies, particularly least developed countries. So could you just explain, so that we're all in the same place, what industries the CBAM will be applied to, and which countries are likely to experience those impacts? And then specifically, Zambia has been, we've got here the example, interested in exporting not just the critical minerals, but the products made from them, like batteries. Are they going to be hit by the CBAM?
Well, that there is a very big understanding of the difficulties that might come of CBAM, not least for the LDC groups and for the LDC countries. This is a very big understanding for the EU. It's something we discuss with the ministers when we're defining and developing this legislation, and it's been a topic that's been frequently discussed. So first of all, the understanding is there. And Sweden has a very strong belief that we need to pay attention to how this regulation will affect specifically both CBAM, but also let me mention deforestation regulations and other regulations that we're developing, both for climate and for environment. And we know that this will affect our relations with African countries. We know that our credibility and our attractiveness as a trading partner will be affected by these types of regulations. So first of all, there is a big understanding. But I need to also mention the fact that CBAM is a very useful tool for the EU, because we have made a lot of progress, and it hasn't been easy. It's been, you know, demonstrations outside parliaments, farmers putting fires into their höbalmar, which I don't know the English translation for. But there's been a lot of conflict in our countries while we've been developing climate legislation. This has been a tough development that we've gone through, and for my country specifically, we had carbon taxation before I was born, 30 years ago. We've had a very high level of carbon taxation affecting a discussion on just transition in our countries. Socio-economical groups that have a tougher socio-economical situation have been critical towards how our carbon taxation is affecting their lives. We've had a development where we had a lot of oil into our electricity system, but we phased it out and we built nuclear, and nuclear was such a big discussion in our country. People were scared, people were concerned, and we've had long debates, and then we built the nuclear and we phased out the oil, and this was in the 70s and 80s. So we've gone through these phases in a different point of time in our countries, in my country specifically. A lot of EU countries are still on that journey, but for us it is getting very frustrating. For example, being at these types of negotiations where we're having discussions on finance not being met up by the same level of discussions on mitigation. Because for us, we have a 97% clean electricity system, our transport sector is becoming electric, our industry is becoming electric, our steel plants are becoming clean. They're working very hard to reach a goal of being net zero by 2030. So they're doing their homework. And for us to be developing at this pace, it's a good thing because the world needs to lower our climate emissions, but it's a very problematic thing if the EU is standing there alone, if the EU is building up CBAM regulations and other types of carbon border regulations that will only increase if we do not make sure to have a stronger development in all of the world. So a focus for Sweden here is not only to push forward in the negotiations and to have discussions where we understand each other's standpoints more, it's also to make the proposal of Sweden being a climate match partner. We want to make sure to match different countries with companies that can produce something that is lacking, that can build a factory for a certain thing that is needed, and we want to develop these types of, you could say, operative corporations, because we need to get going, we need to have a higher level of mitigation, and this is becoming quite concerning for us. So that's the standpoint of these regulations being developed.
Could I ask you, Chibamba, about what conversations you've had with the EU about this? So you expressed a concern that we hear from many developing countries about the CBAM. Have you had specific conversations with the EU about which products might be affected, how you would come in under it? So Zambia, for example, is almost entirely renewable energy driven. It has hydroelectric power for a very large proportion. So you are already a green producer. Are you discussing with the EU what the emissions of your products would be such that you would not be getting affected by the CBAM? Have you been having those conversations?
Not as yet. We've not had those conversations yet. But at this point, remember we just signed a bilateral agreement with Sweden a few days ago. So this is a best starting point for us to sit down and really look at it in detail and see what are the likely impacts that we're going to get from this. Where are common areas of agreement? Where can we meet halfway? So we have not had intense discussions about it, but we'll be starting having those discussions very soon.
I said before you arrived, Minister, that we weren't going to conduct the EU-Zambia negotiations here, but I'm going to try. Looking from the outside, and this is a question to both of you, and Tanish, I'd be very interested whether you're hearing similar kinds of things. Looking from the outside, the European Union, along with the other countries of the global north, including the UK, where I'm from, which is sadly no longer in the European Union, are very worried about the concentration of supply of many green products. Let's be honest about it, from China. China has done amazingly well in developing its green sectors. It now supplies very large proportions of solar equipment, wind turbines, electric vehicles, and so on, and batteries. And as we were saying earlier, or I was trying to say, is the dominant global supplier of critical minerals. They're not mined in China mostly, but they're refined in China, so they come into European industries from China. And let's be honest about this, the northern countries, the EU is worried that we are now, speaking as a European, over-dependent on China. So, and there, if you look at the statements made by the G7, there's a critical minerals initiative which is all about trying to diversify supply. So from the outside, it would look like the EU has a very strong interest in Zambia, taking this specific example, and other African countries, developing your critical minerals and maybe your batteries and supplying them to the European Union. And in those circumstances, it would be mad, I would say, for the European Union to impose a tax adjustment on them. You want them because you would like them to come from diversified sources. So isn't there some kind of agreement that I'm asking both of you now, that you could envisage in which the European Union says, we welcome African green industries, critical minerals, batteries and so on, for diversification purposes, and we're going to support you with investment and not put a tariff barrier on you. Does this sound plausible to both of you? Minister, let me start with Zambia.
Thank you very much for that question. It's a very interesting question. And I think for Zambia, even our president is very clear. We are a friend of everybody. whether east, north, or south. We work with any partner. All we are interested in ourselves is joint ventures. How do we get a stake in these initiatives that are coming on our ground? So it's joint ventures. And secondly, it's value addition. It will not matter where the investment is going to come from, whether China or whether EU. And as you have seen already here, we are signing bilaterals. We've signed with Norway, we've signed with Sweden, we can sign with anybody else. So for us, it has to be substantial investment, which goes through a joint venture and value addition. I mean, granted, China have made progress in this sector, and it might be very difficult to stop them in one day. So I think we will not go in those issues of trade battles between big guys. I think we'll leave that issue between themselves. But for us in Zambia, we work with anybody. We can talk bilaterally and agree on the terms of engagement, and we'll get the investment, whether it's coming from north or from east or from wherever. Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I'd say that Sweden's aim is to further involve the LDC countries into international cooperation, international trade, and not least being a partner in that endeavor, because we're seeing such initiatives, such as the ones from Zambia, signing agreements, wanting to develop mining, such a progressive way of handling the climate crisis. So we, of course, want to cooperate as much as possible on this to further the development and make sure that we can buy our critical raw materials from Zambia instead of China. And of course, the CBAM regulation it's still developing, it's still being discussed, and we have discussions specifically with countries that we are very keen to involve further in our economies. So I think that we'll have to make sure that we have those frank dialogues on what our concerns are and how to solve them best as we can, and to make sure that we're all aware that China will also be affected by CBAM. And so those discussions will be had with everyone. And we're trying to create as much as possible a level playing field without it affecting the level of climate transition that we want to have for Europe. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very concerning for me that we have a situation where EU has adopted the world's most ambitious climate legislation for all of our 27 countries together to implement. We have big fines if we do not live up to the level of decrease of climate emissions that we should live up to. And these regulations that EU has adopted is in line with Paris agreements. So we need to deliver on this, and we're working very hard to deliver on this, but when we're not seeing that level of decrease of emissions from specifically big growing economies, we will have to have CBAM types of regulations. This is a natural effect of what is happening. So it's concerning, but it's also not surprising, right? And I think we should keep that in mind as well.
And it's worth saying that there is a precedent for special agreements between the EU and least developed countries in this kind of area. Under the Common Agricultural Policy, there were special arrangements for imports of agricultural products from the African, Caribbean and Pacific countries under the Lomé Convention. So there has been previous examples where European trade policy differentiated between different trading partners. I want to come to you, Sanish, on this. How much are you hearing amongst the countries with which WIPA is working this anxiety about border adjustments, but also a desire to, as we've heard, go up the value chain, add value, refine products and so on, and not simply be commodity producers?
Yes, I think there is a lot of anxiety, to be very true, not just in LDCs, but as large growing economies also, there is a lot of anxiety. But our anxiety is not coupled with deterrence. So we are looking at possible opportunities that CBAM may provide. So I would, as WIPA and as India also, would like to, as Invest India also would like to just give a food for thought that before implementing CBAM, if there could be some amount of technical assistance and capacity building for LDCs and growing economies to actually transition, because in today's global world, the global north has the financial and technological capital, but the global south has the human and manufacturing capital. So we have to go hand in hand. And I think EU also understands that you cannot isolate LDCs or growing economies, because they are going to be the backbone of the manufacturing industry in the coming days. What we would like, or what we are hearing across the LDCs as well as growing economies, is that if we are supported to adhere to CBAM, and if we are not penalized but incentivized to move towards fair playing ground, that will be of great help, because as Honorable Minister rightly said, that there has been a significant journey of EU to come until this point. For the global south, the journey has just started. So we are at the different laps in a marathon. They are at the end lap, we are in the first lap. So for us to come to that end lap, if there are incentives, if there is technical assistance that is coming in, that will, I think, solve the problem for everyone. Thank you.
Minister?
No, I definitely agree with the remarks that have been made here. And I think it's also a very interesting aspect of the journey that we're all in, that we need to make sure that other countries are not doing it in the same slow way that the EU has done it, because we've done it in my country, as an example, we've done it since the 70s, and we've had a lot of mistakes on the road, and we had a lot of development on progressing the modernization of both legislation and technology and all of these aspects of climate transition. So we need to make sure that everyone else learns from our mistakes. It's not about only sharing everything that's been great and wonderful. It hasn't been like that. There's been a lot of mistakes during the road, and we need to make sure to share how we can make sure that those mistakes aren't repeated when the journey of transition is happening in other parts of the world as well. And we need to also make sure that we have the aspect, when we're speaking of just transition, that we include the aspect of the level of consumption that EU has, right? Because it's easy, for example, for my country to pat myself on the shoulder and say that we have the lowest emissions in all of EU per capita, and I'm very proud of that. But this is not taking into account the consumption-based emissions through the consumption that all of the citizens of my country are making use of because of our strong economy. So this is also something to have into consideration. And I just think that there's a lot of need for dialogue on this as well, because sometimes I think maybe there's an unawareness of the fact that we are aware of this, and we do include it when developing policies, when, for example, developing something like CBAM, that we do have a problem with consumption as well, that we need to get progress on.
I'm interested to know whether we have questions or comments from the audience. So if you would like to say something, a comment or a question, please do raise your hand, and we can provide you with a mic. But let me ask just one more question then from me, which is about the trade regime. So in theory, we have a multilateral trading system through the WTO. In practice, over the last few years, we've seen much more bilateral and regional trade agreements. The EU has done them with a lot of countries, so has the US, so has China and others. Do you see progress being made in trade agreements, either multilaterally through the WTO or through bilateral and plurilateral trade agreements? And if so, what kind of trade agreements are the ones that you're looking for? Would any of you like to answer that? Sanish, do you have an answer?
I might have an answer, because India is currently part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. Though it's not a hardcore trade agreement so nothing is binding on anyone. But the ray of hope over there is, one of the pillars of IFF is clean economy. So there we are talking about just transition, we are talking about clean economy, and in IPEF there are 14 countries coming together with the same intent to support climate action. So there we are seeing a lot of traction, and the trade agreements which India is signing bilaterally or with multilaterally have climate and energy transition as the focus areas, with a lot of investments being facilitated through the trade agreements as well. So that is a ray of hope for us over there.
Yeah,
Dr.
and
Chibama.
I think we're also at a turning point globally. We started advocating for globalization at some point. We wanted to become one global village. But in the recent past, we are seeing a lot of protectionist theories by countries again, which kinds of seems to be contradictory. But however, in Africa, I think we have a number of regional trading blocs, and we are also talking about the Africa Free Trade Area, where we want to have easy movements of goods within Africa before we go outside Africa. But I think the challenge to the World Trade Organization is how do we deal with these protectionist attitudes that we are seeing of late? Because there are, I mean, if you look around, you are seeing countries placing, for example, 100% tariffs for a particular renewable energy innovation to enter that country. So I think the World Trade Organization has some homework to do there, but we do have intra-Africa free trade area where we want to trade more within Africa, but we do have different bilateral trade agreements with the East or with the North, like I mentioned earlier on. We are basically just looking for where we can get the market at a good price, and we'll go there. Thank you.
Minister, I think your team are
Yes,
saying...
exactly. I need to run back to negotiations.
I can see them.
Yes, they're a bit more stressed than I am. No, I just love to give a final answer before we get back to the negotiations, which is that free and rules-based traditional trade systems are so important for knowledge sharing, what we were discussing earlier, right? This is how we truly make sure to share the knowledge that we have on how to produce goods and services in the most sustainable way, for example. So it is very problematic when we have a type of both protectionism and regionalization where regions are becoming more interconnected to each other and having less trade amongst each other. And this is a development that we're definitely seeing. We can start talking about it out loud and be frank that this is what's happening in the world. We're moving from globalization to more of a regionalization, yes, I don't know the word, but you understand what I mean. And this is, of course, a problem, and it's not least a problem for sustainability and for a climate transition that should keep a high pace. So this is something that we'll have to tackle ahead. And Sweden's way of tackling it, the EU is a thing of its own for trade purposes, and but what I can say is that my country and Sweden is working very hard to develop our bilateral cooperations in these types of times. So we're increasing this. I just made a decision with the government a week ago on furthering our international cooperation when it comes to climate transition. So we're having a few people that would work operative out in other countries with finding cooperation grounds with Sweden and that country. Swedish companies are very eager to help and to show what solutions have worked for Sweden during the past decades, of how we have gotten to a more sustainable economy. So exporting this knowledge and exporting, if interested, that company as well, building up a factory, building up a service, we're very eager to do this. So we want to export the solutions that have worked for our country to other parts of the world, and we will increase this when we are seeing the types of developments that we are seeing with more protectionism and less cooperation. But of course the multilateral system is under a lot of pressure right now, a lot of pressure, and it's fired up by the conflicts that we have in the world. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to make sure to increase the good examples we have of cooperation and of knowledge sharing to accelerate green transition.
I think we shall let the Minister go. Thank you very much for those remarks. I would hope that next year, when we invite you both back, we can hear about the further development of EU and Sweden-Zambia cooperation in green industrialization and trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to ask a question in the last couple of minutes from the floor? Because if not, I'm afraid I think we've nearly run out of time, but if there are any questions or comments, I'm very happy to take one. Why don't you come and, I don't know whether we can stretch. Yeah. Please say who you are.
Hello. Hi. My name is Max. I'm from the University of Oxford. My question for the panel is regarding the IRA in the US. So we've talked about the CBAM already, but in terms of the IRA, we have global north government subsidizing the green transition, say, is a positive development. But a lot of those benefits are sort of ring-fenced by some kind of protectionist measures as well. So I want to get the perspective from the LDCs, what the view is from this perspective on measures like the IRA. Thank you.
So for those who are not aware, I'm sure you all are, the IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act, slightly misnamed, but is the green industrialization promotion system in the US, which is both tax credits of various kinds and also they are limited to goods made in the United States, which is effectively a kind of protection.
Dialogue is required for us to come on a midpoint where the concerns are resolved and we are on the same page, because I think this is about dialogue, because it's not about one or two countries, it's about multiple countries coming together. And as WIPA, we work with both the LDCs as well as the Global North, and what we have seen is Global North has been quite supportive to making the programs for WIPA happen in LDCs. So I think more conversation would, I am sure, will enable us to resolve the concerns as well.
Dr. Chibamba?
Yeah, just to agree.
In fact, these I think will be your final remarks. So anything else you want to say?
Yeah, just to agree with my colleague, I think that's a big matter. And again, we push the challenge to World Trade Organization. In one breath, we are talking about globalization. In the next, we are talking about protectionism. So I think that's a matter that has to be resolved at that level. But like I indicated earlier on, for us in the LDCs, we are just looking for the opportunities. It doesn't matter whether it's in the global north, it's in the east. If we agree bilateral on terms and conditions, we are ready to go. And thank you so much.
Did you want to ask a question? Please do. And then I think this will probably have to be the last, but do you want to come over and yes? And thank you. Just say who you are. I think if you speak into it, people in the audience can hear, because the...
I'm from World Resources Institute.
Hello? Yeah.
I'm from World Resources Institute and Beijing office. So very glad to hear about the many interesting points, and also congratulations for Your Excellency Porsche, that is you combine the green economy and environment together. And also glad to, we're working on many supply chain. Critical mineral is one of them, and also on food supply chain. So how to greening the supply chain? We're working with many China's enterprises and association. So my question to you is there any possibility that Zambia helping that to tripartite collaboration? For example, the Sweden, China, and working together on critical mineral supply chain. So it is possible for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. They say where there is a will, there is always a way. So there's a possibility. We can get your details and then we discuss. Like I already said, we are working with China, we are working with Sweden, we can work with anybody. So I think we can make some follow-up discussions and see if a tripartite arrangement is possible. I mean, like I mentioned earlier on, no one can ignore China today in the area of renewable energy. So we can't ignore. So for us, if there's a possibility to do a tripartite arrangement, we'll pick up the conversation with you. We'll get your contact details now, and then we'll see if there's a possibility there. Thanks.
That's a nice, positive way to end a meeting with a contact, a network made, not just between Africa and the European Union, but also with China. That is it, I'm afraid, just because of time. Can I say thank you to both of our speakers who remain and to the one who's had to leave. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the EIF and to IID and the Gates Foundation who've helped support this with ODI Global. This is a conversation that we've really only just started. And for many developing countries now, the green industrialization path, as you said, Sanish, we're at the start of it. And the degree to which that path can be supported by European Union, by China, and by others, I think will be one of the big questions, not just for the climate community, but for the investment and trade community over the coming years. So I hope you found that an interesting conversation. I'm sure we will be back, I was going to say here next year, not here, but in Belém, Brazil next year to talk further about it. Thank you all very much indeed, and
Thank you so
you.
much.